Minister, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting the International Energy Agency to discuss with you this morning the Slovenian energy concept, the preparations of this concept. And I'm very happy to be in Ljubljana. My colleague Laszlo Varo regrets that he could not come. I will be very happy to present you with the views from the energy side, from the international side. You know that the IEA is advising, is together with its member countries reviewing energy policies. Every now and then we have presented some recommendations to the German energy concept, and recently last year in December we presented the in-depth review of the European Union policies, which of course is a large book that you can also read afterwards if you have to learn all the details. There's an incredible amount of data and analysis in the book. I would like to start off actually with a global context before getting into the question of what EU countries can do and should look out for when working on the energy union. Now we are all on the road to Paris. This year it's important to see that a global climate agreement could be shaped towards the end of the year. And as every country is trying to prepare their climate change scenarios, their ambitions in that context, in fact the World Energy Outlook, that is the recent one, has done an assessment and comes to the conclusion that if we really want to limit the climate change impacts to a 2-degree scenario, we need, in fact, 4 times the investment into low-carbon energy technologies that we have so far done in 2013. And that is, in particular, energy efficiency, $1 trillion US dollars. Then there is a huge chunk on renewables, as you see here. And there's also nuclear and CCS as part of the low-carbon picture. In fact, the IEA has another report under preparation as our input to the COP in Paris that is coming out in June, looking at all the commitments from the different countries globally, seeing how far we can get. And we have realized that, in fact, in 2014, the global increase in global carbon emissions has actually halted for the first time, despite economic growth and despite countries further investing in fossil fuels. So there is maybe a reverse in our trends, and it is something where we will be studying more in detail. Overall, the energy production, if we look at the world as such, you see the non-OECD countries are clearly the ones that see most of the increase in energy production. In fact, they contribute 80% of the global growth in coal, 75% in oil, and almost 80% for gas. And you see the OECD countries, they will mainly be very much performing on the renewable side. All the major increase comes from the OECD countries. And if you look at the European Union on the last, you will see all the future looks very renewable. At the same time, there's a big discussion, and there was last year also in the run-up to the Energy Union, and still under the current proposals, energy costs are an issue that governments are wary of. And if you compare global prices, the first news is all economies will face higher energy costs. But in the European Union and in Japan, the costs will stay high. While you have the big emerging economies, China actually overtaking the United States, and India will see the doubling of their energy cost. We have to keep that in mind when we talk about competitiveness, because as everybody's costs increase, but we are at the European Union level, remain one of the highest areas. In fact, we have been seeing over the past decades that the European Union is emerging as a leader in low-carbon economy, with decreasing carbon intensity, decreasing energy intensity, and impressive growth in the renewables. You will see here in green the second from below, the EU, and it is a remarkable growth that has happened. But if we take it to 2020, our analysis shows that we might not achieve the 2020 target by 9% in the electricity side. So that is because not every country and not every technology will be on track as we predict. And globally, the EU actually risks losing its market share because emerging economies, developing economies are very much rapidly picking up in the renewable market, and they will see the major growth. So we have to watch how the I think this was one of the energy union conclusions, and it's always underlined that the EU is risking to lose this leadership. At the same time, the oil and gas production, this shows the gas production in the EU, is just falling extremely fast, much faster than we expect. The Netherlands sees the fastest decline, and we have also in the North Sea, the investment conditions are not as such that we will see major oil and gas production increases. So that means the future is not only renewable, but it also is full of imports to cover these declining domestic productions. Now, this hasn't been anything new, but I think that the speed of the decline has been extremely fast. And in fact, even at the IEA, we believed in 2011 that most of the unconventional gas in Europe that could be harnessed if the conditions were right would be 80 BCM. But this is by no means possible if you look at all the current public confidence problems, plus investors pulling out of Poland, and the overall price relations on the oil and gas markets. There is no signal to see from unconventional for some time being. At the same time, we're competing with the international markets on LNG, so that means we are much more exposed to price differentials between Asia and North America. And this is good and bad news, but we are a participant as the European Union in the global LNG market, which is much more global now than it has been before in the last decade. I would like to summarize this outlook a bit, because I think it sets the scene for the discussion on where we go in terms of the energy union priorities. So the outlook is our demand in the OECD, in EU included in that picture, or even bigger than the OECD. The demand in our part of the world will be most practically flat. All the oil and gas production are pretty much declining, so the growth comes from the renewable energies, and there will be much more imports, and they will cost. That means energy costs are high, and they will remain high for some time, increasing. A lot of energy security concerns, particularly in gas and in electricity for the EUs, that need to be addressed. And politicians within the G7, within G20, are very actively working and are actively committed to energy efficiency and renewables, because they are a major driver for the energy security. So to summarize, we are in a full energy system transformation, and in that new era we need also new rules. I would like to focus on decarbonization and take you back to the low-carbon roadmap that was presented by the Commission in 2011. And you see that, in particular in the power sector and in the transport sector, they're increasingly, most of the reductions in emission have to come towards 2050 in the power sector to 93-99%. But where do we stand today? Well, since 1990, the emissions have come down, so the carbon emissions are now still very high in power and transport, as you see on the right side. And in particular, this decarbonization, one can wonder what was it, was actually the result of what has been the driver of this decarbonization. Now, it was not the carbon price, because the carbon price, as we all know, collapsed from about 30 to 6 per ton of CO2, and it has been largely the renewables that were driving the decarbonization, and they were funded by national support schemes, national subsidies, and as well the economic crisis simply has cut out a lot of industry demand. So we have taken out also gas, because coal has seen a revival with having substantially lower prices to offer than carbon prices could direct. So this revival of coal use and power has had a major impact together with the renewables, and let me focus, that's why, on the power market in Europe. If we look to the generation side on the left and to the capacity side on the right, what we can discover is that we have two trends that set the scene since 2008. On the one hand, good news, we have seen a huge investment boom in the power sector. So a lot of new capacity has come online. In fact, $100 billion were invested, 80 billion from renewables alone, and a lot of new modern gas-fired power generation. At the same time, our demand, however, in Europe has collapsed. You see the curve going down in the economic crisis. That means that we have put online a lot of power generation at a time where the demand was not there. That leads to the impact that a lot of fossil fuel thermal power plants have reduced their hours they are online. And at the same time, the wholesale prices came down because economic downturn plus a lot of renewables that have literally no cost at the wholesale price. That means we have a completely new market. And at the same time, in the future, if we look into what will happen in the next decade, we see that we're actually phasing out coal for climate reasons, because we have to phase out some of the oldest plants, which is probably a very good thing. The Large Combustion Plant Directive obliges member countries to take out their old coal plants. At the same time, if there is no CCS, there will be also no future for coal. And that means, in addition, another base load, nuclear, also faces a lot of retirements, because nuclear capacity has been around for about 30 years. And as you all know, the question is, can we extend their lifetime and operate them longer term? But at some point, there is also a phase-out or an aging factor. And so far, we have not seen a lot of new nuclear being built. That means our generation adequacy within the European Union will change dramatically to a system where we have high shares of variable renewable electricity, wind, but also solar, very low marginal costs, and that is an uncharted territory, not only for industry, but also for regulators, for governments. Everybody is looking how to cope with this new system, and that will be one of the biggest challenges. And in addition to the picture on the wholesale market, actually there is another story to tell on how these renewable subsidies will work out in the future, because we have already now in 2013 seen renewables around 52 billion in the EU. So if you compare it to other global markets, you see that countries are all pulling a lot of money into renewables. But it means also these costs are staying with us for a long time, because they are investments into 20, 30 years of lifetime. And we also have to replace renewable much quicker than we had to replace fossil fuel or nuclear energy. So there is also an investment in the replacement plus the investment that we have already spent on the subsidies. So that means overall the subsidies will likely be, even in the EU around 2025, 64 billion euros. Technology costs are coming down, that is the good news, and we're very much hoping that the support schemes can be made more cost effective. As member states are driving in the EU very different energy policy choices, as my colleague from the World Council from the BEC has explained to you, these different choices, how will they be consolidated? It is really about creating an energy union in order to achieve these common targets. So the main conclusion from the in-depth review that the IEA has done was that the EU needs to work on its internal energy market and need to have much more cost-effective and efficient climate and energy policies. As we know, we had a huge learning curve in the EU, how to manage the cost of the transition. So if we have a new system with much more renewables, variable renewables, that means we have to manage those costs. And we have all the lessons there. All the countries have had different experiences, and this needs to be harnessed and needs to be further discussed and brought together. So the good news is actually things are underway, and that's why from the IEA in our in-depth review we have issued a number of recommendations to the European Union, and that means not to the European Commission per se, but to all the countries in the Energy Union, meaning we have focused on three main issues: on effective energy and climate policies, on the internal market, and on nuclear. Now, under the energy and climate policies, we believe that a more market-based framework would be desirable. So maybe the IEA, despite the variety of our member countries, we do follow more a jazz approach than the symphony approach. But important is for companies to take decisions in this world that also the energy markets are working effectively, and there needs to be a more reconciled approach between energy markets on the one hand and climate policy on the other hand. That you can achieve if you put a lot of priority on energy efficiency. Then you add on an effective carbon market with a reform of the EU ETS, so that you have a flexibility in the carbon price to adjust to different policies and different economic situations. And the third component is you add on an investment environment created by technology-specific policies, and that can be working on non-economic barriers, but also technology support. And fourthly, you need to get an idea where you spend energy, where you spend money on energy, what are the subsidies in the system, and you try to analyze them and reduce them over time so that public intervention can be more effective. On the internal energy market, this brings me to my concluding remarks. We believe that everybody agrees we need to start much more on an interconnected system, because if we have renewables, it's impossible to stay with a national electricity system, and no longer these systems are national. By all means, we have seen the market coupling. That means a lot of interconnections are in place in Europe already. So countries are literally all talking to each other via their connected markets. And that interconnectivity needs to be much more supported because the benefits are very high. In particular in electricity, our recommendation is to create a market for this new system, which is supporting intraday and balancing electricity across the borders. One important part is to look after system operation and adequacy assessment beyond the national market at the regional interconnected system. And the third point here on electricity markets is to ensure that generation is valued at the right time, location, and that the system's service contribution is taken into account. On natural gas, our recommendations were also in the Energy Union well reflected. We believe it's very important to focus on gas storage and LNG, and in particular because countries are much more under energy security concerns, it's important to diversify the gas supplies. And last but not least, as very much underlined by Alberto Potočnik from Acer, we also see the retail market reform is really the very important part to do. And there is much more for the national governments, of course, to look after their retail policies. But we think that from an union side, from an energy union side, there must be a strong push for phasing out regulated retail prices, because they are harmful to competitive markets. And obviously with demand side response and dynamic prices, you have impossibility to have much more choice for consumers. So with that, I would like to leave you for the discussion also this afternoon, and I wish you very good luck in the preparations of the energy concept in Slovenia, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much.